Good morning, and you're all welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. This morning's webinar is brought to you by Teagasc in association with Food Drink Ireland SkillNet, National Rural Network, and Dairy Sustainability Ireland. This morning's webinar is on the value of native provenance and hedging stock. And we're joined this morning by Joe Gowran. Joe is CEO of Woodlands for Ireland, and by Maria Cullen. Maria is the chair of the Society of Irish Plant Pathologists. You're both welcome. You're both on mute there.
Thank you, Pat.
We're also joined. We're also joined by Catherine Keena, and Catherine has been on the air quite a bit this week. This webinar is the final of a set of 6 webinars for Hedgerow Week. Catherine, it's been a busy and I think very successful set of webinars.
Well, I hope so. And I suppose in summary, Pat, we're very fortunate to have a network of hedges in Ireland, 689,000 kilometres. But what we heard was that quality is not where it could be to deliver biodiversity, carbon and all the other ecosystem services from hedges. The theme of this week is understanding hedges better. And we have had engagement from over 20 or so individuals and organisations. And I suppose, Pat, what I took from the week was that we all need to work together and maybe most importantly, listen to each other, because there are so many individual aspects of hedges. We all kind of want the same thing, but you know, there are different angles to it, and we really need to listen to everybody's point of view.
And I suppose that the more we learn about hedgerows, the more we appreciate their key role in the landscape for biodiversity and how they fit with other elements like field margins, etc.
Yeah, and I think it's just their importance is because of how much we have of them. You know, they're on every farm, in every townland, in every parish, and that's the link to the most common link to nature that both farmers and non-farmers have, I would suggest. Joe,
you're welcome to the webinar this morning. You might give us an idea of your background and your interest in the area.
Yes, so before I came to work full-time with Woodlands of Ireland last year, I was a woodland management contractor, and I specialised in the native woodland scheme measures, particularly native woodland conservation and establishing new native woodland. But I've also was founder member with the Hedge Laying Association of Ireland, and did a small amount of hedge laying. I wouldn't be a top hedge layer. But I understand what's involved with that, and continue to take a keen interest in that aspect of hedgerow management. So with Woodlands of Ireland, we're looking at certain things to do with seed supply and sustainable plant production, not only for hedges, but also for the native woodland schemes. So I'll focus on that aspect in the talk.
Yeah, and whatever you weren't doing in terms of being out there, you were quite influential in terms of talking about them. Maria, you're hearing around the country, we hear.
I'm a geologist by training. I did natural sciences in Trinity College and then did various studies after that. But I've been interested in studying and working on a range of fungi, lichenized and non-lichenized fungi in particular. And then for the epiphytes in particular, you need to know what substrate they're on. So you needed to know the trees and plants as well. I think the background in horticulture at home with my dad when I was a child and helping out, or being made to help out at times, but really enjoying growing and transplanting seedlings and planting them out and learning about names and systematics a little bit has really led on to other things, I guess. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Joe, if you're ready to begin your presentation. You're on mute there again.
Yep, sorry, Pat, I'll go for share screen now. Let's see. So go for slideshow. let's see.
Yeah, click on from.
Oh yeah, that's it now. Yeah, sorry.
Excellent.
So the value of native provenance trees and hedging stock and how to reduce health risks to them. So I'm Joe Gowran of Woodlands of Ireland. Just the photograph there is actually from the Kildare County Hedgerow Survey by Anya Murray. I think we'll go back to 2005 or so. But so it's showing the link between hedges and areas of native woodland and the connectivity in the landscape. So Woodlands of Ireland is a charity which was founded in 1998 and connected at that time with the People's Millennium Forest Project with the Millennium. And the objectives are to promote native woodland conservation and the creation of new native woodland. Were part funded by the Forest Service, partly by National Parks and partly by the Heritage Council. Just an image there of a laid hazel hedge, and behind it, at the background there, there's quite an old hedge with oak ash hazel actually in it. Now, the presentation that I'm going to do today includes reference to the following. First of all, Woodlands of Ireland's interest in the hedge habitat conservation. And then we look at the list of tree species that are considered native to Ireland. And that's from a presentation by Jenny Roach, National Parks, that she did with us in a webinar a few weeks back. Should get a link to that in the chat shortly. Why is it important to source seed for hedge stock locally? We'll have a look at that. What is meant by provenance or origin, just a basic definition of that. Is there a broad species diversity in Irish hedge types? We'll explore that a bit. What can the county hedgerow surveys that have been done up to date, the 16 of them, what can they tell us about the location of native provenance locally to us? And how might planting stock issues be resolved? Because we know that there are going to be shortages of stock for various schemes. So Woodlands of Ireland, our interest in the hedge habitat conservation. First of all, just slightly obscured at the top of the screen there for me. Hedges are a form of linear semi-natural woodland in ways, and in other countries are interpreted, other European countries, as a part of agroforestry, although not clearly in that mold here yet. They often provide refuge for woodland species, and also they're a source of seed and cuttings, not only for hedge stock, but also for native tree stock, for example, the native woodland scheme. Now, the hedge measures in CAP and also in the current REAP scheme, they draw from the same pool of plant supply as native woodland scheme measures. So this is something that we're watching carefully to see what way can we assist in improving the supply for both agri-environment and native woodland scheme measures. Now, the hedgerow appraisal system is often referred to in studies of hedges here in Ireland, and that was based on a previous method by Fuchs and Murray. That's Neil Fuchs and Annie Murray, and then it was refined in the technical advisory panel group of Woodlands of Ireland into what's now known as the hedgerow appraisal system. So we've been involved with that back, that was 2014, and that was published. Also recently and currently, Heritage Council are providing support to us for an experimental hedge project aimed at moving towards a national hedge inventory, which would be integrated into the National Forest Inventory. And the key thing there is that at the moment, a lot of the county hedgerow surveys are done with hedgerow appraisal system, and it's not in a format that can be absorbed into National Forest Inventory. And if it was in part of National Forest Inventory, then we would be able to argue better about the carbon stores, as well as the biodiversity and the fact that we have more hedge area than virtually any other country in Europe per square kilometre. So in that project, we're looking at hedge plots of that are the same size as the forest plots, so the two can be compared. And we're using, with modern technology, the aerial views, and then your computer technology with polygon and shape files, things like that, to have the same size because of the irregular shape of hedge boundaries. And that's ongoing. You should hear more about that during the next year. Now, one of the factors with hedges is that there was talk about escaped hedges earlier on in the week. Catherine was referring to on a number of occasions, where they form tree lines and they can also expand out with bramble and so forth, and then natural regeneration of species from the hedge and gradually become scrub, or what other people call emergent woodland. And this is something that then brings it into potentially native woodland conservation. There's a subsection on emergent woodland to bring that in and allow it to grow on to full woodland. So that is another thing that brings us into the realm of paying attention to what's happening with the hedgerow network. Also, hedges on ancient boundaries may contain remnants of ancient woodland. There's many townland names that are based on names of former townlands that would have been predominantly wooded, Derry and Quill and so forth. Now, just to give an indication of what's happening with, actually I have the incorrect graph there. That's the Native Woodland Conservation Scheme, where there was it was a scheme that was cut in 2008 and then reintroduced in 2015, and then there was an increase, a kind of a takeoff in applications, and then it was cut due to the complications of the forestry backlog. What I actually meant to put up there was the native woodland establishment figures, which is a similar graph, except it continues in an upward trend. So with native woodland establishment, there's a strong demand for all the species that are looked for hedge planting currently, and that will continue in the next number of years. I'll actually send on the native woodland establishment graph, because it's instead of that drop off there, it actually continues in a similar angle on an upwards trajectory. So there's pressure there for supply of hedging stock, and we'll come back to that again. Now, this is the list of native species, which were referred to in Dr. Jenny Roach's webinar talk that she did with us, and also with Brian Clifford of the Forest Service a number of weeks ago. And the link to that will come up in the chat, where she goes in more detail to describe a lot of those native species. So why is it important to source seed for hedge planting stock locally? Now, this was something that was of concern to Neil Fuchs and Annie Murray when they were back in, I think it's 2005, when they were doing the Offaly County Hedgerow Survey. And things really haven't changed in this regard. But the origin, I'm sorry, just see, can I move this box? Oh, yes. So the origin of plants or seeds determines their adaptability, quality, and wildlife value. Now, the adaptability is something to do with how species adapt to their local environment over time, and a lot of the stock we see in our hedges, if it was certainly before 1980, if it was planted or occurred from natural regeneration, is likely to be of stock that has been in the country for hundreds, if not thousands of years. I'll come back to that adaptability point in a few minutes. The wildlife value has been discussed in some of the other webinars during the week. We'll just touch on that a little bit more as we go along. Now, a point that was made back in 2005 there was that more information is needed on the status and production capacity of the hedgerow nursery sector in Ireland. And this is something we're looking at. There isn't a specific list of nurseries that supply native material. That's to say, material is sourced from seed, collected and propagated in Ireland. There is one big nursery who supply most of the forestry trade in the private sector, and also from the hedging point of view. And there are a number of smaller operators. But what we hope to do in the coming months is to actually collate a list and have it available on our website, so that people can just make it easier to find the limited stocks that are there. Now, just in relation to just a general on the disease risk, there was a statutory instrument that was announced back in July, and they gave a list of harmful organisms that essentially that there's additional controls. One of them there is fire blight, which affects whitethorn, blackthorn, and rowan. And because of this tightening up of plant health regulations in Europe, Brexit complicates things. If, for example, if you weren't able to source material here, it would make sense then to go to the nearest similar location, geographically, ecologically, which would tend to be Britain. But there's complications now with Brexit in terms of trying to import material, particularly those species, and also oak as well. We did a webinar with Gerard Catalan of Forest Service on the second webinar we did that follows the one that Jenny Roach and Brian Clifford were in, and the connection to that will be in the chat as well. And in that, Gerard Catalan discusses the issues around marketing of seed, registering seed collectors, and just everything to do with forest reproductive material, which at the moment doesn't apply in the hedge sector, but does apply to all forestry schemes. And also just to do with disease, to check for more details on the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine website. So what is meant by provenance or origin? The simplest explanation is that it's the location from which a seed lot or cuttings used to produce plant material was collected. And we'll go into more detail in a minute. Then I have the Forestry Commission from a practice note there. It's a much more detailed description of the same thing, really, which I won't go into the details on that there, but basically it is the location from which a seed lot used to produce plant material was collected. Now, just about the provenance, trees of the same species adapted to different regions of Europe can bud burst, or they can put out flower or seed at different times, as illustrated partly in this Forestry Commission image. And you see there that they have two batches of birch seedlings on the left from Norway and on the right from France. And the French provenance one has come into leaf earlier, and the Norwegian one is still dormant, which could mean for insects that they would be, if you had a lot of that material put into the mix or it could be different species like hawthorn, and same thing could happen if you were getting stock from say the far end of Bulgaria, say near the Turkish border or something like that, to the nursery, and you could get cheap hawthorn and import them in. You may find whatever about the disease risk, they will need a plant passport, but that they will come into the bud burst will happen at a different time, and the flowering will happen at a different time, and the seeding will happen. And the more of that there is, the more of a mismatch there is then for birds, mammals, and insects. who have co-adapted with the local tree species here in hedges or in woodland. So that is one of the reasons, a key reason why local provenance has a value. So is there a broad species diversity within hedge types around Ireland? Now, this is just bear with me on this now. So what I've got there is a map produced by Dr. John Cross, formerly of National Parks and Wildlife Service. And essentially what it's showing is if the land was allowed to rewild, what type of woodland would cover the landscape if it's left to its own devices over a period of time. Now this could develop in a, just for argument's sake, in a 30 to 40 year time frame from now if you just left things to their own devices. And he developed a map partly from, this is quoting him here, an indication of potential natural vegetation is obtained from remnants of some natural vegetation, including hedges, scattered trees, or shrubs. So, and the boundaries of vegetation units were added using maps of field boundary vegetation, anthropogenic grassland and peatlands. So essentially, part of how he constructed that was based on the hedgerow network and knowing what species are resident in them. But just with the key to that map there, it's mostly 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 woodland types that are in areas where most of our hedge habitats are occurring today. So if we go back to the map there, the brown areas, for example, to be the little or no hedge in that area because it's a lot of upland and peatlands. And so the hedges tend to occur in the sort of lighter green area, but you can see that in some places, like in the middle there of Roscommon, that's, but like this, if you were to do a national hedgerow inventory, the pattern would come out looking something similar to what you see there in terms of the local variation in your hedges. And I'll just go into that in more detail. So county hedgerow surveys have a lot of information about the location of this native provenance stock.
Joe, so just to remind you, you have 5 minutes if that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so Monaghan was resurveyed. It was probably the first county to be resurveyed, and they showed a 10%, up to a 10% loss in hedge in an 11-year period, which isn't good. But these county hedgerow surveys contain data that showing the frequency that different trees occur in the range of hedges locations across the county. So you can be very specific. In fact, in here's an example from Galway West Galway compared to East Galway to Cavan to Roscommon. You can see there with hawthorn that this is the frequency of these species occurring in the hedges that were surveyed. So, for example, East Galway there, 90.3% of the hedges surveyed had a significant amount of hawthorn in them, where it was much lower in West Galway. You can see it's consistently high in Cavan and Roscommon there. And then you take willow, there's quite a bit of variation. It's occurring in 50% of the hedges in West Galway, but only 16.4% in East Galway, which is it's a very dry ground in East Galway. Cavan then is a bit wetter. It's the Mount Willow comes up, and Roscommon tends to be quite dry for the most part, particularly in the southern end of the county. So there is that localized variation. You can see it there on the holly figures as well, that varies a bit. And so studying these county hedgerow surveys can indicate the type of mixture, say for when you're doing filling in of hedges or for new planting. And you can see the broad range of species. Now, some of them are not native. For example, fuchsia there is not native and is a bit of a spreader as well. but using your native species list and then looking at what tends to occur based on the county hedgerow surveys. And in fact, in the National Biodiversity Data Centre, they do have all of the individual hedge information from the squares where they do the surveys available to look at. So you can get drill down and get very specific to your local area as to what the species mix that tends to occur in your hedges, and then base your restock or new hedge on that. To some extent, it's a resource there to look at. So there's a bit too much detail here. The forestry productive material is something that doesn't apply the rules of that to hedges at the moment, but it's something that should be considered to strengthen the reduce of disease risk and that. So the possibility of using optimal species combinations and forestry productive material, which is both adapted to site conditions and genetically diverse, is often limited by what is available in nurseries. And this is from Forest Ecology and Management papers that's back in 2014. But the plant supply situation in Ireland is very common throughout other states around the world, and they have the same issues as described here. And just in the third paragraph there, where it refers to restoration practitioners who plan to obtain forestry productive material from existing nurseries should communicate earlier with nursery managers to provide sufficient time for propagation of desired species. So this is an ongoing problem, that when you have schemes announced that the nurseries needed 2 to 3 year lead-in time to actually build up the stocks. You know, CAP 2023 is an opportunity for Department of Agriculture to promote sustainable hedge management. And this is, I'm concluding here now. What's required is to support the native tree nursery startups and expansion of existing nurseries to build up the stocks, and to provide training, and we can help this on seed sourcing and the propagation of native tree seed, to work with stakeholders to develop a code of best practices referred to earlier on in the contractors discussion on Wednesday. We fully support that, from the planting end to the maintenance end. So the department needs to look at spreading the take-up of cap hedge planting measures over several years so that nurseries can gear to meet the increased demand. So that means that you can't have everybody applying for the hedge measure all at the one go. You need to spread them out, otherwise the pressure will be on to bring in imports, and that is where the disease risks escalate. So finally, just it is possible to learn from the native woodland process what's happened with that over the last 20 years in terms of the native woodland survey, which is kind of inventory, and the classification of native woodland types, which we could also do with hedges, and then the development of management guidelines, which can be quite specific to localized conditions for a diverse range of hedge types that's required to be conserved. So that's that's my points that I hope to make today. Thanks, Pat.
Thanks very much, Joe. If you stop sharing, and we'll get Maria to share her presentation and take over. I think some key policy recommendations there, which hopefully our policymakers will take on board in terms of hedgerow planting and planning ahead.
Thanks,
Maria,
Pat.
you're ready. Okay, we can see that now, Maria.
Okay, I'll start away then. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks to Joe for doing most of the introductions. Thanks a lot. The species here are just an example of what we have as regards native trees and hedging stock. Some of them feature in the REAP scheme. It's just to give a little sampler of some of the species that we're talking about today. In terms of provenance, I might have a slightly different take on it than others, but I'm talking about Irish tree seeds from Irish material as far as can be possible to ascertain. So that's fairly self-explanatory. I hope Irish grown, Irish medium, and not peat for obvious reasons. It would be best to keep material far away from exotic and imported material at all times while seedlings are developing. And there is a question of origin. We have muddy waters here playing the guitar for this reason. Irish tree seed is in some instances sent abroad and seedlings are later re-imported. This material can later then be called Irish origin after a time, but it's best not to buy these plants. I'm taking a fairly hard line on phytosanitary measures in my own life, and this will surface again in the talk. It may not be SIP's line or anybody else's, but it's definitely my approach. Plants may be carrying pests and diseases that are hard to spot when they're imported, and they can damage and kill your own trees and plants and those of your neighbours. So how to tell the difference? If in doubt, leave it out and try to grow your own instead. I always think back to Johnny Appleseed and the simple story of eating apples and planting the seeds and leaving a woodland developing behind him, or a seed orchard. Forest genetic resources is a term that's often used, and the definition from the FAO, that's the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, is quite long, but the heritable materials maintained within and among trees and other woody plant species that are of actual or potential economic, environmental, scientific, or societal value. And there's approximately just under 60,000 tree species in the world. Most of them have high levels of genetic diversity and offer great potential for increasing the production of both wood and non-wood forest products. So there's quite an emphasis there on economics, and FAO's goal is to achieve food security for all. So their definition reflects that and maybe doesn't reflect the overall view. When it comes to Irish forest genetic resources, we don't have genomic data for Irish trees, nor do we really understand the Irish tree species genomics. There are a huge number of other species associated with Irish trees over and underground, and we don't understand them either. When we talk about phenotypic variation in trees and plants, we just mean what we can see. So in that sense, we're dealing with form and height and general fitness in the same way that Mendel, the monk, and his peas, there's a poem to go with that, did his studies. It's a little bit beyond that, but we're not very far beyond that level. When it comes to comparisons then of genomic information, pedunculate oak, Quercus robur, has 12 chromosome pairs. So that's double in the case of chromosomes, obviously, and 26,000 genes and 750 million base pairs. So if you think you have 900 or so base pair information, or up to 3,000 base pairs, you're not really knowing very much about the overall genetic information for an oak tree. Humans then, for comparison, we have 23 chromosome pairs, 20,000 genes and 3 billion base pairs. But loblolly pine surprised everybody. It's slightly modified now, but 24 chromosome pairs, 23 billion base pairs. It's an absolutely huge genetic resource, and is being unwrapped. But the problem is that we don't really know how to interpret most of this information. Just to put a plug in for traditional knowledge, Hedge Laying Association of Ireland has always been doing stalwart work and learning as they go about how to manage hedges in Ireland, and are really helpful in everything they do. Also, there's the development of what I would term the slow hedgerow movement, the don't mow, let it grow idea. And here people are working with sides at Ballymoney Riverside Park, Northern Ireland. In forensic science, there is a term, remember that every contact leaves a trace. This was coined by Edmund Lockhart, really the first major forensic scientist, a Frenchman. Just the image on the other side there showing an extreme form of contact. On the plant health risk side, that's really what I'm talking about today. We're dealing with things at the moment that include insects, aphids, weevils, beetles. We have things like slugs, nematode worms, real worms, and spiders, moths, the oak processionary moth, and has arrived in Ireland and has been controlled, but it poses a human health hazard as well. So that's sometimes why some of these challenges are met more seriously. I would consider a heterohelix an invasive species on trees because it really does cover up an awful lot of epiphytic species that are there, over 300 epiphytes, and some of them in major threat from heterohelix cover. The fungi then that we deal with at the moment already in Ireland are Hymenacyphus fraxineus, the ash dieback, Phytophthora ramorum, chestnut blight, Gibberella circinata, and bacteria fire blight was mentioned earlier, Erwinia amylophora. But there are viruses too that are very hard to spot, and it's a huge challenge to get these things as they come in. The EU list of priority pests was released there in 2019. Just to draw your attention to two there in bold font, Agrillus planipennis, sorry. The emerald ash borer beetle is very cute and very dangerous. It kind of takes over ash trees that are already suffering from ash dieback and really finishes them off. And then the big one at the moment is bacterium Xylella fastidiosa. It can infect hundreds of species of plants and trees. Are we looking at the last march of the Ents? It's a bit dramatic, but we know that about 30% of tree species around the world are threatened with extinction. Some of those are quite rare in nature, but at least 142 tree species are recorded as extinct by BGCI. So the main threats to tree species are forest clearance, forms of habitat loss, other than that, and then exploitation for timber, other products, and the spread of disease and pests. If you suspect that you have a novel species of disease or pest in your hedgerow or trees and plants, please do go ahead and contact the Horticulture and Plant Health Division or the Department of Agriculture, Johnstown Castle. Just in the top corner there, there's the emerald ash borer. We're really watching out for that. And then Led Zeppelin aren't likely to show up in your hedgerow, unfortunately, or fortunately, as you might see fit. Just the driver of this is world trade. You could shorthand that for greed, potentially. Some of these products are obviously very necessary, but some are deeply not, and are being carted around the world to give us all these very comfortable lives. But there is a major drawback at the other side. So we can see the lines going up and up and up, up to 2020, where things did pull back a little bit. But there's some great papers out there, one being mentioned there at the bottom, unwelcome exchange. A lot of inconvenient truths for us to deal with in our daily lives. So the value of hedgerows and hedgerow native trees and plants, obviously trade, agriculture, horticulture, forestry, tourism, to some extent, all of these things interact, and there are imports and exports around the plants and trees that are included in our hedgerows that are also part of our native woodland species. Inherent value for hedgerow's sake. You're dealing with a living habitat and all of the species that live and interact with that. What hedgerows and trees and plants in them have ever done for us? Well, there's a whole list of ecosystem services there and things that they do to clean air, to sequester carbon, to flood mitigate and give soil security, as well as shelter and boundaries. The hedgerow species themselves are priceless, and you can't get them back once they're gone. So the cost of not protecting our trees and plants, as said before, we have 689,000 kilometres of hedgerows in Ireland, hopefully still. Ash is our most common hedgerow tree and our most common tree in Ireland. So the loss of ash and the dealing with ash dieback, Hymenacyphus fraxineus, is approximated at 14 billion euros, not to be sniffed at, and a very, very, very serious problem for us all. Add to that the suffering, death and potential extinction of dependent species, birds, animals, fungi, algae. That includes the lichenized fungi, of course, the algae, liverworts and mosses. And then the current, the loss and mitigation required for all the other diseases and pests currently attacking Irish trees and plants, and the ones on the way. So New Zealand flatworm is a big ugly thing to consider, as opposed to some of the very cryptic species that I consider, the fungi and some of the viruses. So this New Zealand flatworm came into Ireland among a couple of other countries. It's thought to have travelled in potted plants and then moved around the country quite successfully. Trajectories of introduced plant health threats kind of mirror what human health issues, but there are no hospitals for plants, unfortunately. So ports, airports, botanic gardens, nurseries, major infrastructure plantings, and private gardens, and then things move out into the wider countryside. But that's generally, some of the trajectory can overlap there, but that's generally it internationally. Just to lighten the mood a little, would you rather be Tina in Mad Max 3 or Aretha with a lot of self-respect and respect for the environment around us and all of the creatures that depend on hedgerows and hedgerow plants? I know where I'd rather be. What can we do for our Irish hedgerows, trees and plants and their health? I suppose the main thing is to keep it clean. There's some fairly radical ideas here, but growing your own hedgerow trees from your own healthy, robust material in your own fields and in your immediate area, teaching your children and friends about seeds and nature and all of the fun you can have while doing that. Those are the precious memories, and those are the things that children and the next generations will take forward. If you have to buy in, purchase local material as much as possible and from extremely reputable sources with their excellent phytosanitation measures in place. Don't buy anything that doesn't come from Irish seeds or cuttings that has been grown in Ireland. I know some people will find that awfully hard to take, but it is just my opinion. Trim hedgerows lightly and only where and when necessary. I know there are lots of regulations around hedgerow management, but the lighter touch is the best. Managing ivy, cut it where possible. There's plenty of it around. We won't make it locally extinct. It's just tearing through things, and it's making trees very top heavy. Sterilizing of cutting equipment as much as you can, vehicles, wheels, footwear, washing clothes and ourselves after we deal with plants and managing hedgerows, especially if we're cutting things. We can spread disease by cutting equipment. Just to show a little experiment that was done that shows the harm we can do inadvertently. Dirty boots, rinsed with water boots in the by two, and then disinfected boots, the third set. Then these were swabbed onto Petri dish plates, and you can see the results there hopefully at the end. So this was an experiment done in University of Ghent. It's very obvious the consequences. And of course, if you have a chance and you're interested at all, please consider joining the Society of Irish Plant Pathologists. Their autumn and spring meetings and their get-togethers showcasing Irish research on plant health and pathology. It's really, really cheap as well. So just if you're that way inclined, we'd really welcome more members. And please consider following us on Twitter as well at SIP Pathologists. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Maria. If you could stop sharing there. Okay, well, if you generate as much fun in those meetings as you're doing here, they should be very attractive. I suppose on a serious note, I suppose nobody needs to be told about the risk of diseases at the moment in what we've lived through for the last 2 years in relation to humans. But how seriously do you rate the threat to a significant variety of our species, from what's happened to ash and what previously happened to almond? Is it a really, really big threat to a big number of our species?
I think all of us, I don't know where we all are in Ireland, but if we look out the window, we can see that European legislation and the policing of that, and that, hats off to anybody working in plant health in Ireland, but things are not working out. If one of the issues I think was pointed out to me recently by Ger Cahalane, and it's very important, is that when it comes to human health, like COVID-19, and we've all learned an awful lot more about diseases and spread because of it. That was one of the few upsides of it. But that legislation for human health and for animal health, in the case of foot and mouth, that legislation is at national level. We can shut the borders if we need to, if we feel that's right. But for plant health, that is an EU decision. So that isn't in our hands to do that. And that is one of the bigger issues. We can argue for that. I think we should, especially with island status and for islands around Europe. But if something comes into Europe as a disease or a pest, it's basically, it could be anywhere in the EU, and it doesn't matter where it comes into. It's as if it's everywhere already. So it's not quite as bad as that, but it's quite limited what we can do to fight something in the plant pathology side. And the other thing is we don't have many solutions. We don't have vaccines. We don't have much understanding of how plants can recover from and how we can help them recover from these. We're just throwing too much at them all at once in the last.
Just to remind everyone, if you have questions for Joe or Maria, just put them in the Q&A. Catherine, a number of questions in already.
Yeah, and I'm going to group some of the 4, 5 or 6 species ones, and Joe, I'm going to comment on the simple ones and let you focus on the 2 I want, because I try and get through them. So if we could keep the answers really brief, just unless you disagree with me, I'm confirming the Cotoneaster is not native. Whitethorn, missing from the list, is down as probably hawthorn. We're back to the reason why we have Latin names, Crataegus monogaiga. So whitethorn farmers use, ecologists, or maybe from books from old, would tend to be hawthorn. So I suppose we should use both all the time, but whitethorn when we're talking to farmers. Rowan is mountain ash, but it is different to ash, so it's not subject to ash dieback. Now the questions, Joe, 2 questions. Where does pear occur in Ireland in the wild? And secondly, can you comment on Rosa rugosa? That's what I'm interested in, both your answers, or whoever wants to take it. The confusion, because it's sold in edible hedging mixes and it's also listed as an invasive. So the pear and the Rosa rugosa, Joe.
I don't know any exact locations of where wild pear occurs, but I would say that National Parks and Wildlife Service staff, particularly an inquiry to Dr. Jenny Roach, a woodland ecologist in national parks, that they will have maps that show localized squares, 2 kilometer squares, it's somewhere in there that it'll have been recorded of wild pear. But I don't know any precise locations. And sometimes, because when you have rare species like whitebeam, it's on Jenny's list, there was a number of whitebeams types, and some of those are quite rare, and you do require a permit from national parks to collect, because they're concerned about damage to the remaining stock. Some of them are quite close to extinction.
Rosa rugosa.
Yeah, well, Rosa rugosa, I don't think is on the list, but no. But of the sort of bramble species.
The query, Joe, that I know is it good or bad? Is it invasive, or is it something we should be selling as an edible? And maybe Maria wants to come in there, but go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, no, I haven't observed it myself as, you know, in situ, in a situation of being invasive, but that doesn't mean to say it isn't. I would defer to, again, to particularly national parks on that, but if it's not on that list that I've showed you earlier, then it's not a native species, essentially.
Yeah, I'd agree there. Maria, do you want to comment on that one?
Yeah, I think Rosa rugosa is a bit garden escape as well, but it can be, it's one of those, Declan did a lot of work on Rosa in hedgerows, and it's definitely not a bad thing to have in a hedgerow. But pear, we did note on Bear Island, pear as a garden escape, even around the fortifications on Bear Island. So occasionally pear will jump across the hedge and get going a little bit as well, but it wouldn't be in any way invasive, or obviously.
Okay, and just a final one on ivy questions, and I don't think myself and Maria are disagreeing. Maria may be a bit stronger on it. While we would both say it's the top heaviness rather than interfering with the tree, and I would just be saying think of all the other species. This is my point about we can't just think of one thing, but I don't think we're too far aligned on that one. You know, you have to make a considered decision rather than saying all ivy must go. Just come back now. I want to get through a few questions here. Biodiversity equivalence of an old 200, 2,000-year-old hedge versus a newly planted one.
No contest. From an epiphyte point of view, that's why offsetting doesn't work, because even if you plant your new hedge before you take out the other one, you're talking about years before the new hedge will start inheriting the species from the old hedge before you remove it.
Are we talking hundreds?
Incredibly important to get that point across, that it's not replacing like with like. It's really, it's not even that it'll take you 100 years to get back to where you were. It's now impossible for some species to come back to that hedge because they're too far gone in terms of their removal from the landscape, their harm to them from pollution and just physical removal, so that they will not re-find that hedge again, or they're extinct already.
Okay. Joe, are you differentiating between native and local? And then you may want to come back on that one as well. Are you differentiating between native versus local?
No, I mean, your native species are ones that have colonized here after the last ice age and have been continuously adapting to the climate and conditions here over that thousands of years. And then you have more recently introduced species, for example, beech. Was introduced maybe in the late medieval period, or maybe Tudor or 17th century even. Sycamores may have come in a bit earlier, possibly Norman times. Nobody's exactly sure on those things.
But I think Joe is you started off, there was the word local there. Would you recommend only sticking to local, or are we okay with anything that's native to Ireland?
When I say local, I mean the island.
Okay.
Yeah. When they talk about the provenance and Ireland as a unit is considered to be one seed source as an island itself. Geographically, and that includes Northern Ireland as well, of course. Yeah. And of course, any plant health measures that we take, we need to coordinate with Northern Ireland authorities so that it operates on an all-island basis.
That's very clear. That's great. And just, I suppose you were making the point about consider what's growing locally from the hedgerow surveys, but you can, yes, but that's a slightly different angle. No, that's
yes, clear. Yeah. So in your local county hedgerow surveys, and some of them are half counties west or east of Galway, for example, you can see what the species mixture is more localized to a particular farming area.
Okay, thanks.
And that should help in selecting species for restock, and also to where to collect seed from as well.
And just that there would be local effects like the geology, the soil, the phenology locally as well, which varies a little bit. I know from the fungi, days rather than weeks, kind of, you know, in the mix across the island. But those local pockets and local conditions really do over time give local material an edge over introduced material, even if they initially have an advantage in trials that usually wears off after some time.
Okay, thanks. Look, we're coming to an end, and Pat, I'm coming back to you, but I just have two more comments because you may have spotted some more later questions. Just again, I can confirm the county surveys are not annual or regular, or not even been done in all the counties. Yeah. It's very haphazard. Fantastic example of Monaghan. They're repeating one during the week. And last question from me for both of you possibly, which is the nub of what we're talking about today. Any suggestions for actions for the domestic nursery sector, which is in decline?
Sorry, repeat again, Catherine.
How could we help? Have you any suggestions for actions for the domestic nursery sector?
It is something that the Department of Agriculture and Teagasc in particular can assist in developing training, in this case specific to native species, so that we can increase the volume of material available. But it is going to take several years. There are a number of small startups at the moment in County Clare, and also I know we've got to take an all-island perspective here. For example, Ulster Wildlife Trust will be starting a new nursery next year. There is Northern Ireland Conservation Volunteers. We will be we're going to upgrade our website. We'll have information on that. We'll keep adding on any new information we can help to assist in terms of training that might be happening, and networking of seed collectors and get people in the nursery business to meet together and coordinate their efforts as well. And just there are resources like this, Our Trees, and you can download that from our website. It's very good if you decide to go into seed collection or plant propagation in a small way. And again, there's resources on the TCV website. It's the Conservation Volunteers, which is Northern Ireland Conservation Volunteers. There's a couple of downloads there that are very useful in terms of getting started on seed collection and propagating plants. So I'd advise we'll put up links on that on our new website as we go, or you can contact us and we can send you those if you can't get them by Googling it.
Small and local is beautiful, I think, but also the fact that the nursery sector needs to be consulted with in advance of any announcements for grant schemes for tree planting. If those trees, seedlings aren't there or coming on stream, it forces imports, or it forces practices that don't benefit anybody in the country, and definitely not the trees or plant health.
Yeah, I've taken a few messages there that are aimed at our policymakers. One is to plan ahead and make sure that the entire movement that is required here works together. I suppose just to finish, there's a lot of work going on at the moment by our policymakers in terms of preparing for CAP 2023. You've mentioned a couple of things. Are there any final messages that either of you would like to send to our policymakers?
Well, for me, the key thing is to plan out how farmers who wish to take up the hedge measures can be spread over the time, so that the nurseries can successfully gear up. Because the seed will need to be collected. They need to know what volume to collect of individual species next autumn and into the winter. And then to get the volumes right, so that we can focus mainly on our own indigenous native stock, and improve our plant health situation, because there are a lot of risks out there, and we have to do everything we can to reduce those risks. rather than just leaving the door open and saying, oh, there's nothing we can do, let's just have a free-for-all.
And I don't know where to start. One, more funding, please, for all kinds of plant health in Ireland. These people like Derek Callan and James Choisel and people, they need more money to do this, to run around and check everything coming into the country, and proper quarantining needs to be devised. The other thing would be the hedge layers. There are people like Joe and Woodlands of Ireland. There's the Organic Centre. There's so many groups around the country who have learned how to manage plants and trees and work with them to help humans get what they need as well. And sometimes you feel that the people who have put in the most time are nearly being bypassed for some strange reason by the powers that be. There's great resources and there are great people in Ireland and great knowledge, and just use what's there in the training that's required in rolling this out and helping people do the right things that they want to do anyway. I think in their heart and souls, they know what's right. It's just facilitating that, really.
Okay, thanks very much. We need to leave it there. I would like to congratulate everybody who has been involved in Hedgerow Week, led by Catherine. I think a great resource once again, which will be available for anybody who wants to look back on it. All the presentations, the videos from the week, and all the webinars will be available. In particular, I'd like to thank Yvonne Marr, who did Trojan work in making sure that the whole thing hung together, and there were a few fairly hairy moments, I think, during the week. So Yvonne showed her mettle during those. So thank you very much. To our series producer, Andy Boland, from the Signpost series. Again, thanks very much for all your work. And hopefully we will see you next week for our final webinar of the year. So with that, goodbye and thanks for watching. Goodbye.
Thanks,
Thank you. Bye.